Chapter 31, Part 1 of New Grub Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. New Grub Street by George Gissing. Chapter 31, A Rescue and a Summons. Part 1. The chances are that you have neither understanding nor sympathy for men such as Edwin Reardon and Harold Biffen. They merely provoke you. They seem to you inert, flabby, weakly envious, foolishly obstinate, impiously mutinous, and many other things. You are made angrily contemptuous by their failure to get on. Why don't they bestir themselves, push and bustle, welcome kicks so long as halfpence follow, make place in the world's eye, in short, take a leaf from the book of Mr. Jasper Milvain? But try to imagine a personality wholly unfitted for the rough and tumble of the world's labor market. From the familiar point of view, these men were worthless. View them in possible relation to a humane order of society, and they are admirable citizens. Nothing is easier than to condemn a type of character which is unequal to the coarse demands of life as it suits the average man. These two were richly endowed with the kindly and the imaginative virtues. If fate threw them amid incongruous circumstances, is their endowment of less value? You scorn their passivity, but it was their nature and their merit to be passive. Gifted with independent means, each of them would have taken quite a different aspect in your eyes. The sum of their faults was their inability to earn money, but indeed that inability does not call for unmingled disdain. It was very weak of Harold Biffen to come so near perishing of hunger as he did in the days when he was completing his novel. But he would have vastly preferred to eat and be satisfied had any method of obtaining food presented itself to him. He did not starve for the pleasure of the thing, I assure you. Pupils were difficult to get just now, and writing that he had sent to magazines had returned upon his hands. He pawned such of his possessions as he could spare, and he reduced his meals to the minimum. Nor was he uncheerful in his cold garret and with his empty stomach, for Mr. Bailey, grocer, drew steadily to an end. He worked very slowly. The book would make perhaps 2 volumes of ordinary novel size, but he had labored over it for many months, patiently, affectionately, scrupulously. Each sentence was as good as he could make it, harmonious to the ear, with words of precious meaning skilfully set. Before setting down to a chapter, he planned it minutely in his mind, then he wrote a rough draft of it, then he elaborated the thing phrase by phrase. He had no thought of whether such toil would be recompensed in coin of the realm, nay, it was his conviction that, if with difficulty published, it could scarcely bring him money. The work must be significant, that was all he cared for. And he had no society of admiring friends to encourage him. Reardon understood the merit of the workmanship, but frankly owned that the book was repulsive to him. To the public it would be worse than repulsive, tediously, utterly uninteresting. No matter, it drew to its end. The day of its completion was made memorable by an event decidedly more exciting even to the author. At 8 o'clock in the evening there remained half a page to be written. Biffen had already worked about 9 hours, and on breaking off to appease his hunger, he doubted whether to finish tonight or to postpone the last lines till tomorrow. The discovery that only a small crust of bread lay in the cupboard decided him to write no more. He would have to go out to purchase a loaf, and that was disturbance. But stay, had he enough money? He searched his pockets. 2 pence and 2 farthings, no more. You are probably not aware that at bakers' shops in the poor quarters the price of the half-quartern loaf varies sometimes from week to week. At present, as Biffen knew, it was 2 pence 3 farthings, a common figure. But Harold did not possess 3 farthings, only 2. Reflecting, he remembered to have passed yesterday a shop where the bread was marked 2 pence halfpenny. It was a shop in a very obscure little street off Hampstead Road, some distance from Clipstone Street. Thither he must repair. He had only his hat and a muffler to put on, for again he was wearing his overcoat in default of the under one, and his ragged umbrella to take from the corner, so he went forth. To his delight, the twopence halfpenny announcement was still in the baker's window. He obtained a loaf, wrapped in it the piece of paper he had brought (small bakers declined to supply paper for this purpose), and strode joyously homeward again. Having eaten, he looked longingly at his manuscript. But half a page more. Should he not finish it tonight? The temptation was irresistible. He sat down, wrought with unusual speed, and at 10:30 wrote with magnificent flourish, "The End." His fire was out, and he had neither coals nor wood. But his feet were frozen into lifelessness. Impossible to go to bed like this. He must take another turn in the streets. It would suit his humour to ramble a while. Had it not been so late, he would have gone to see Reardon, who expected the communication of this glorious news. So again he locked his door. Halfway downstairs he stumbled over something or somebody in the dark. "Who's that?" he cried. The answer was a loud snore. Biffen went to the bottom of the house and called to the landlady. "Mrs. Willoughby, who is asleep on the stairs?" "Why, I s'pect it's Mr. Briggs," replied the woman indulgently. "Don't you mind him, Mr. Biffen. There's no harm. He's only had a little too much. I'll go up and make him go to bed as soon as I've got my hands clean." "The necessity for waiting till then isn't obvious," remarked the realist with a chuckle, and went his way. He walked at a sharp pace for more than an hour, and about midnight drew near to his own quarter again. He had just turned up by the Middlesex Hospital, and was at no great distance from Clipstone Street, when a yell and scamper caught his attention. A group of loafing blackguards on the opposite side of the way had suddenly broken up, and as they rushed off he heard the word "Fire!" This was too common an occurrence to disturb his equanimity. He wondered absently in which street the fire might be, but trudged on without a thought of making investigation. Repeated yells and rushes, however, assailed his apathy. Two women came tearing by him, and he shouted to them, "Where is it?" "In Clipstone Street, they say," one screamed back. He could no longer be unconcerned. If in his own street the conflagration might be in the very house he inhabited, and in that case he set off at a run. Ahead of him was a thickening throng, its position indicating the entrance to Clipstone Street. Soon he found his progress retarded. He had to dodge this way and that, to force progress, to guard himself against overthrows by the torrent of ruffiandom which always breaks forth at the cry of fire. He could now smell the smoke, and all at once a black volume of it, bursting from upper windows, alarmed his sight. At once he was aware that, if not his own dwelling, it must be one of those on either side that was in flames. As yet no engine had arrived, and straggling policemen were only just beginning to make their way to the scene of uproar. By dint of violent effort, Biffen moved forward yard by yard. A tongue of flame which suddenly illumined the fronts of the house put an end to his doubt. "Let me get past!" he shouted to the gaping and swaying mass of people in front of him. "I live there! I must go upstairs to save something!" His educated accent moved attention. Repeating the demand again and again, he succeeded in getting forward, and at length was near enough to see that people were dragging articles of furniture out onto the pavement. "That you, Mr. Biffen?" cried someone to him. He recognized the face of a fellow lodger. "Is it possible to get up to my room?" broke frantically from his lips. "You'll never get up there. It's that Briggs," the epithet was alliterative, "as upset his lamp, and I hope he'll get roasted to death." Biffen leaped on to the threshold and crashed against Mrs. Willoughby, the landlady, who was carrying a huge bundle of household linen. "I told you to look after that drunken brute," he said to her. "Can I get upstairs?" "What do I care whether you can or not?" the woman shrieked. "My God! And all them new chairs as I bought!" He heard no more, but bounded over a confusion of obstacles, and in a moment was on the landing of the first story. Here he encountered a man who had not lost his head, a stalwart mechanic engaged in slipping clothes onto two little children. "If somebody don't drag that fellow Briggs down, he'll be dead," observed the man. "He's layin' outside his door. I pulled him out, but I can't do no more for him." Smoke grew thick on the staircase. Burning was as yet confined to the front room of the second floor tenanted by Briggs the disastrous, but in all likelihood the ceiling was ablaze, and if so, it would be all but impossible for Biffen to gain his own chamber, which was at the back on the floor above. No one was making an attempt to extinguish the fire. Personal safety and the rescue of their possessions alone occupied the thoughts of such people as were still in the house. Desperate with the dread of losing his manuscript, his toil, his one hope, the realist scarcely stayed to listen to a warning that the fumes were impassable. With head bent he rushed up to the next landing. There lay Briggs, perchance already stifled, and through the open door Biffen had a horrible vision of furnace fury. To go yet higher would have been madness but for one encouragement. He knew that on his own story was a ladder giving access to a trapdoor, by which he might issue on to the roof, whence escape to the adjacent houses would be practicable. Again a leap forward. In fact, not 2 minutes elapsed from his commencing the ascent of the stairs to the moment when, all but fainting, he thrust the key into his door and fell forward into purer air. Fell, for he was on his knees, and had begun to suffer from a sense of failing power, a sick whirling of the brain, a terror of hideous death. His manuscript was on the table where he had left it after regarding and handling it with joyful self-congratulation. Though it was pitch dark in the room, he could at once lay his hand on the heap of paper. Now he had it. Now it was jammed tight under his left arm. Now he was out again on the landing, in smoke more deadly than ever. He said to himself, "If I cannot instantly break out by the trapdoor, it's all over with me." That the exit would open to a vigorous thrust he knew, having amused himself not long ago by going on to the roof. He touched the ladder, sprang upwards, and felt the trap above him. But he could not push it back. "I'm a dead man," flashed across his mind, "and all for the sake of Mr. Bailey, grocer." A frenzied effort, the last of which his muscles were capable, and the door yielded. His head was now through the aperture, and though the smoke swept up about him, that gasp of cold air gave him strength to throw himself on the flat portion of the roof that he had reached. So for a minute or two he lay. Then he was able to stand, to survey his position, and to walk along by the parapet. He looked down upon the surging and shouting crowd in Clipstone Street, but could see it only at intervals, owing to the smoke that rolled from the front windows below him. What he had now to do he understood perfectly. This roof was divided from those on either hand by a stack of chimneys. To get round the end of these stacks was impossible, or at all events too dangerous a feat unless it were the last resource. But by climbing to the apex of the slates he would be able to reach the chimney-pots, to drag himself up to them, and somehow to tumble over on to the safer side. To this undertaking he forthwith addressed himself. Without difficulty he reached the ridge. Standing on it he found that only by stretching his arm to the utmost could he grip the top of a chimney-pot. Had he the strength necessary to raise himself by such a hold? And suppose the pot broke? His life was still in danger. The increasing volumes of smoke warned him that in a few minutes the uppermost story might be in flames. He took off his overcoat to allow himself more freedom of action. The manuscript, now an encumbrance, must precede him over the chimney-stack, and there was only one way of effecting that. With care he stowed the papers into the pocket of the coat. Then he rolled the garment together, tied it up in its own sleeves, took a deliberate aim, and the bundle was for the present in safety. Now for the gymnastic endeavour. Standing on tiptoe, he clutched the rim of the chimney-pot and strove to raise himself. The hold was firm enough, but his arms were far too puny to perform such work, even when death would be the penalty of failure. Too long he had lived on insufficient food, and sat over the debilitating desk. He swung this way and that, trying to throw one of his knees as high as the top of the brickwork, but there was no chance of his succeeding. Dropping onto the slates, he sat there in perturbation. He must cry for help. In front it was scarcely possible to stand by the parapet, owing to the black clouds of smoke, now mingled with sparks. Perchance he might attract the notice of some person either in the yards behind or at the back window of other houses. The night was so obscure that he could not hope to be seen. Voice alone must be depended upon, and there was no certainty that it would be heard far enough. Though he stood in his shirt-sleeves in a bitter wind, no sense of cold affected him. His face was beaded with perspiration drawn forth by his futile struggle to climb. He let himself slide down the rear slope, and, holding by the end of the chimney brickwork, looked into the yards. At the same instant a face appeared to him, that of a man who was trying to obtain a glimpse of this roof from that of the next house by thrusting out his head beyond the block of chimneys.
"Hullo!" cried the stranger. "What are you doing there?"
"Trying to escape, of course. Help me to get onto your roof."
"By God, I expected to see the fire coming through already. Are you the as upset his lamp and fired the bloomin' house?"
"Not I. He's lying drunk on the stairs, dead by this time."
"By God, I wouldn't have helped you if you'd been him. How are you coming round? Blest if I see. You'll break your bloomin' neck if you try this corner. You'll have to come over the chimneys. Wait till I get a ladder."
"And a rope!" shouted Biffen. The man disappeared for 5 minutes. To Biffen it seemed half an hour. He felt, or imagined he felt, the slates getting hot beneath him, and the smoke was again catching his breath. But at length there was a shout from the top of the chimney stack. The rescuer had seated himself on one of the pots, and was about to lower on Biffen's side a ladder which had enabled him to ascend from the other. Biffen planted the lowest rung very carefully on the ridge of the roof, climbed as lightly as possible, got a footing between two pots. The ladder was then pulled over, and both men descended in safety. End of Part 1, Chapter 31.